Here's the topic of the day. Metabolic health profile, diabetes risk, and heart disease risk prediction. Ladies and gentlemen, today, we have a very unique, special, yet boring topic, called metabolic health profile, and heart disease, as well as diabetes risk prediction. If you wish to outsmart the average healthcare professionals, and be comfortable to decide yourself for or against the cholesterol-lowering drug treatment, then this is the video for you. What on earth is metabolic health? A metabolically unhealthy person may have metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome may consist of elevated blood pressure, abnormally elevated blood glucose, clinical evidence of fatty liver, with raised triglyceride, and abnormal visceral fat distribution. There is an increased risk of diabetes, heart attack, stroke, kidney disease, osteoarthritis, male erectile dysfunction, as well as dementia, and gout. The intention of this video is to give you a fair idea on risk stratifying one's metabolic health by looking at conventional lipid profile and simple physical parameters in office setting. In other words, one may reasonably predict the metabolic health merely based on information available in doctor's office without any costly and sophisticated laboratory assessment. Before we proceed further, let's play a quiz. Have you ever seen these common skin lesions? It's not uncommon that people who have such lesions got them burned off by simple surgery, yet knowing nothing in terms of their clinical implication. Stay tuned to get the answer. In the previous videos, we looked at the whole meat diet and LDL in the context of metabolic health and their health impacts to the humans. We also discussed about the role of LDL in human body and its clinical implication in cardiovascular health. Check out the video links below if you are interested. For those we are concerned of, elevated LDL after a whole meat diet and its negative impact on health, the LDL electrophoresis study dives deep into LDL subfractions to risk stratify one's metabolic risk via LDL pattern analysis. Unfortunately, such special test is often not easily accessible. Now, you're stuck with if the elevated LDL is metabolically acceptable, and if anti-cholesterol treatment is recommended. An annual fasting glucose and cholesterol profile screening is commonly done in those people who turn 40 or above. Rest assured, without high-end laboratory tests, there is still a get-around with smart use of conventional lipid parameters to predict the future cardiovascular and diabetes risks. Imagine if you were invited to look at your cholesterol profile in doctor's office and being informed that the anti-cholesterol lowering medicine is recommended. So, what's next? Are you going to accept the offer to take the medicine while being haunted with fear of treatment-related side effects? Perhaps you may be more comfortable to go without medicine or delay the treatment if you were able to tell the LDL pattern profile. Unfortunately, traditional laboratory tests in lipid or cholesterol profiles give limited insight to pieces of puzzles in terms of LDL profile pattern. We learned that LDL profile A is metabolically more favorable than profile B in health. We also learned that the lipid subfraction study can only be achieved via electrophoresis study by a special lab. A special lab doing lipid electrophoresis breaks down the LDL further in depth to different densities and sizes. LDL subfractions are clinically associated with incident of cardiovascular event risk. In short, profile A lipid subfractions is totally benign and harmless, whereas profile B is associated with oxidized or harmful LDL. Traditional lab does not tell one's level of oxidization or damaged LDL, giving little insight to one's metabolic health status by looking at the total LDL level. Remember, an elevated LDL does not always mean poor metabolic health, with increased cardiovascular risk, unless one is able to decide the increased LDL is in favor of harmful pattern B. Low carbohydrates diet turns LDL from pattern B to pattern A. On the flip side, high carbs diet pushes LDL towards pattern B. Please take note, a highly saturated fat is not associated with a transition of LDL from pattern A to pattern B. Now, let's dive into the office analysis of metabolic syndrome risk parameters. Once this piece of information is available, you will be able to predict LDL pattern comfortably if the elevated LDL is inclined to pattern A or pattern B. Therefore, this may give you a better sense of comfort if the elevated LDL is of concern. or if anti-lipid medicine is a reasonable, or better option. The so-called higher metabolic risk from outside, also the first out of 5 metabolic syndrome features, is by way of taking one's waist circumference, in the office, and weigh against the healthy reference ranges, in the context of ethnic origin. Interestingly, one can be slim, and yet metabolically unhealthy, the so-called Tofi, due to wrong visceral fat distribution. On the other hand, those who are overweight can be metabolically healthy, due to the nature of visceral fat distribution, in a metabolically favorable pattern. Therefore, the body mass index is not a good indicator for cardiovascular and diabetes risk assessment. From the inside, the laboratory parameters that are linked to higher metabolic risk are elevated fasting glucose, more than 5.6 mmol per liter, elevated triglycerides, more than 1.5 mmol per liter, reduced HDL, less than 1.0 mmol per liter, and elevated blood pressure, more than 135/85 mm mercury. If you prefer to use the conventional unit, please divide the parameter values by a conversion factor of 0.0259. Alternatively, just Google online for cholesterol converter, a calculator that make your job easier. Metabolic syndrome is diagnosed if one has 3 out of 5 of these features. Each of these metabolic parameters is caused by insulin resistance. Interestingly, LDL is not part of the definition in metabolic syndrome. Hence, looking at the LDL per se does not give adequate information to one's metabolic health status. Knowing the strong inverse relationship between HDL and triglyceride allows us to dissect deep into a research-based metabolic risk formula, so-called triglyceride to HDL ratio. For those who look at the international unit of millimole per liter, a triglyceride to HDL ratio of more than 1.8 is said to be metabolic unhealthy, or favorable to pattern B. To be metabolically safe and healthy, the ratio has to be less than 0.8. In other words, a pattern A is secured if the ratio is less than 0.8. If you are more familiar with the conventional unit, meaning to look at milligram per deciliter, a figure of more than 4 is metabolically bad, whereas a figure of less than 1.8 is said to be metabolically healthy. The caveat is, any figure falling in between the extreme end is of questionable, and perhaps LDL electrophoresis may be of benefit. Now, if you decide that you are metabolically healthy with LDL profile in favor of pattern A, perhaps you may be more comfortable with the idea of holding back cholesterol-lowering medicine in the context of elevated LDL cholesterol. What if it's other patterns? Then you have to think harder. Perhaps to consult the experts. Take-home message: what is Tofi? In case you are not aware of it, this is so-called thin outside, fat inside, with unfavorable visceral fat distribution. Hence, waist circumference is a better clinical indicator than body mass index for metabolic health risk assessment. Last but not least, can you guess what these are? Surprisingly, many average doctors are not aware of the clinical implication of skin tags. Unfortunately, the presence of new multiple skin tags may indicate underlying insulin resistance, meaning a poor metabolic health or metabolic syndrome risk.